So, friends, you might remember 2018. It seems like so long ago, but in 2018, there was a string of mass shootings. Unfortunately, in the year 2023, things haven't changed a whole lot in the United States. Just yesterday, there was a shooting in Allen, Texas, which Heather helped us pray about during our prayer time, where 9 people were killed and at least 7 injured. Earlier in the week, Jordan Neely was riding a train in New York and was killed by someone who put him in a chokehold for an excessive amount of time. And people are blaming Jordan Neely for this. But the fact is that no matter what has happened in Jordan Neely's life, he did not deserve to be killed in a chokehold he didn't deserve to be killed. And that is just the truth. So I don't know. We don't know the full story of what happened, but what we do know is that it was an injustice, another act of excessive violence here in the United States. And we've got a violence problem, and we train ourselves to deal with issues through violence, and we need to find better ways. And I bring up the string of shootings in 2018 precisely because it provides us a better example of how to deal with our issues. You may remember that in 2018, there was a resurgence of anti-Semitism that we still have to deal with today, tragically. In 2018, there were a lot of threats against our Jewish siblings and against synagogues. And unfortunately, there was a shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh that killed 11 people and injured 7. As we heard the news of that shooting, people around the country and around the world asked, what can we do in order to help our Jewish siblings? Many of us went to synagogues and offered words of support. We went to our neighbors and offered words of support and other forms of solidarity. But one of the most remarkable things about this situation, and one of the most remarkable responses, was from our Muslim siblings. In the face of that tragedy, Muslims in Pittsburgh and around the country and around the world offered real practical support for our Jewish siblings. Muslim Americans raised over $200,000 through an online crowdfunding campaign to help the Tree of Life families with funeral expenses and medical bills and short-term needs. Tariq El-Mesidi, the founding director of the Muslim organization leading the campaign, stated that their mission was to, quote, respond to evil with good. Wasi Muhammad, the executive director of the Pittsburgh Islamic Center, told the Tree of Life Synagogue, we just want to know what you need. If it's people outside your service protecting you, let us know. We will be there. After the tragedy of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, anti-Semitists made threats against synagogues in Toronto. Several Muslims groups traveled to 6 Toronto synagogues to create a human chain, what they called rings of peace, around the synagogues to protect their Jewish siblings. One of the Muslim organizers, named Fatima Sajan, told CNN that their message to any terrorist who threatened their Jewish siblings was, in order to get to the synagogue, you will have to go through us first. My friends, this is what Jesus was talking about when he talked about the way and the truth and the life. He was talking about people like these Muslims who try to help as best they can, even risking their lives for other people, for their Jewish siblings. That is the way, that is the truth, and that is the life. That is how we find ourselves on the way to God. And somebody give me an amen in the chat section, because this is what Christianity, this is what Islam, this is what Judaism, this is what all of our faith traditions are about. And it is a radically inclusive message that Jesus is giving us today, because our Christian siblings participate in this, our Muslim siblings participate in this, our Jewish siblings participate in this, Hindu, Sikh, our atheist siblings all participate in this way, in this truth, and in this life that Jesus is talking about. Now, if you have heard many Christians misinterpret Jesus' saying in John chapter 14, verse 6, when he says, I am the way and the truth and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, you have heard that in exclusive terms. Many Christians weaponize this passage to say that only people who believe like they do can come to the Father. I am here to tell you, people who do not believe like we do, people who believe differently from us and the way that we believe, are on their way to God. They are on their way to the Father. And this is exactly what Jesus is getting at. Why? Because in John chapter 14, just before Jesus says this, he talks about a radically inclusive view of God. Jesus says that in the Father's house there are many rooms. And guess what? There is room for you. There is room for me in the Father's house. There are rooms for our Muslim siblings. There are rooms for our Jewish siblings, rooms for our atheist and Buddhist and Hindus and Sikh and Baha'i siblings. There are rooms for everyone in the Father's house. Give me an amen. Here we are preaching today. Let's go. There are rooms for everyone. And I imagine that somewhere in the middle of the Father's house, there is a living room where we can all hang out. And then for those of you who are like me, who are introverts and you just want to get away, hey, guess what? You have your own room too. You can have your own room, and we can go there and we can read books and just have all kinds of joyous book reading in heaven. And when you want to go back to the living room, let's go back to the living room, because everybody is included. That is what heaven is all about. If you need more evidence of this, in John's gospel, there are many other verses of inclusion. For example, Jesus says in John chapter 10, I have sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also. Jesus is going around bringing in other sheep that aren't like you. And I want to protest. Hear me out on this. I want to say, but Jesus, those sheep smell bad. I don't know for sure, because I am not a sheep and I have never been a shepherd, but I imagine that sheep can't smell their own stink, but they can smell the stink of other sheep. If this is true, they are very much like human beings. But more important and more to the point, I want to protest. But Jesus, I've been a good sheep that has followed you all of my life. I have believed the right things and done the right things. Those sheep that belong to other folds, they aren't like us, Jesus. We are the good and faithful sheep that have been by your side all this time. And you want to bring those other sheep in? I imagine Jesus does this divine face palm, like this to me as I am saying these words. Maybe Jesus berates me by saying something like, Adam, why are you so slow to understand that the way and the truth and the life isn't just about you or your group? After Jesus says this, that there are many rooms in his Father's house, Jesus tells his disciples that he will go and prepare a place for them, and that he will come again and take them to him, so that where he is, they may also be. Did you notice that Jesus says he will come and take them. It is not that they have to go and find their way to Jesus. It is that Jesus comes to them, takes them by the hand, and says, "Come along with me. I am going to show you the way and the truth and the life. I'm going to bring you with me." That must have felt so comforting to his disciples. I mean, Jesus taking them with him. Sometimes I need someone to take me by the hand and show me the way. And maybe sometimes you need that too. But once again, before we think that Jesus taking his disciples by the hands is just about Jesus and his disciples, or just about you and Jesus, and this leads us to another exclusive interpretation, we need to remember that there is more radical inclusivity in the Gospel of John. For example, in chapter 12, Jesus says that he will draw all people to himself. That's all people. That's you, and that's me, and that's Muslims, and that's our Jewish siblings, that's our atheist siblings, that's our Hindu and Buddhist siblings. Now, some people may think that Jesus will draw all people to himself only to save some and damn others, but that is not how the Gospel of John portrays Jesus. After all, how did the disciples behave near the end of Jesus' life? Do you remember? As Jesus goes to the cross, the disciples all abandon and betray. They deny Jesus. The disciples are faithless in the face of Jesus going to the cross. And even in their faithlessness, Jesus promises to take them to himself. Just like Jesus promises to take you and me and all people to himself and to his Father's house. Yes, Jesus encouraged his disciples to believe in him and to trust in him, but the point of the Gospels are that they don't, that they often do not believe and trust in Jesus. They often do not believe and trust in his way, in his life, and in his truth. And that is good news for all of us, because I imagine that many of you watching this are like me, and sometimes you have doubts. Sometimes you have a faith crisis. Sometimes you have times when you don't know if any of this makes any sense at all. And so if you are like me, and you have what many call this kind of salvation anxiety, I want you to know that you are not alone. The disciples felt the same way. I often feel the same way. And if that describes you, the point is not whether you have the right belief system about Jesus. The point is that even when we feel faithless, Jesus is faithful to you. Jesus will come again to take you and to take all people by the hand to himself and to the Father's house, where there are many rooms. To tell you the truth, there are some people who I would prefer to have a room on the opposite side of God's house. And I might hope that they stay in their rooms for a very long time. Maybe the Father will ground them for a period of time, or maybe the Father will ground me for a period of time until I deal with my own bitterness and resentments. But Jesus says in our passage that if you know him, that you know the Father. Throughout his life, Jesus healed the sick, he loved his enemies, and he included the marginalized. The problem with a lot of Christianity is that it tends to teach that Jesus and the Father are opposites, that the Father is full of wrath and Jesus is our loving friend. But Jesus says that to look at him is to look at the Father. If Jesus is radical love, then the Father is radical love too. If Jesus is inclusive and draws all people to himself, then the Father is inclusive and draws all people into the Father's house in the spirit of love and mercy and compassion and justice. What I am saying here is that Jesus is the embodiment of God Jesus is just what God looks like. And when Jesus says nobody comes to the Father except through me, he is saying that everyone will be drawn to him and go through him to the Father. This is not an exclusive statement. This is a statement of radical inclusivity and radical love. The way of Jesus is shown in our Muslim friends, because the way of Jesus is inclusion. The way of Jesus is love. The truth of Jesus is inclusion, and the truth of Jesus is love, and the life of Jesus is sharing that inclusivity and that love with one another. And so may we share that love with all people, now and forevermore. Amen.